of your screen, you'll see a couple of different things, right? Like the participants. Right next to that is the chat. If you click that chat button down there, it pulls up to the chat onto the right-hand side. You'll see some people have already put things in there, like Mandy with some awesome tree puns. Thanks, Mandy. Like, what is every single tree's least favorite month? September. Very good. I love that. But yes, that is a chat where you can post questions if you guys have questions. I believe that my presenters are going to give some time after their presentations for some questions related to what they were presenting on. And then after both present, if you guys have questions, relatable to the presentation or not so related, but maybe it's an NRCS question, maybe it's a forestry related question, please feel free to ask. We want to try to answer you guys to the best of our ability. And if we need to get back to you, we're happy to take information and reach out afterwards. If there's anything I missed, please feel free to step in. I've been super, super busy today running around with some kids out in the middle of the woods, so I'm happy to be here to moderate with you guys. So we have two presenters today, and I'm going to introduce them, and then I will let the first presenter just go off and start talking about our program. Our topic today is climate smart conservation practices in forest and timber stand improvements for wildlife. Our first presenter is Julie Parker for the United States Department of Agricultural Natural Resource Conservation Service, and she is the district conservationist working out of Orwell in Ashtabula. Julie has worked for the Natural Resource Conservation Service since 2010. She has worked in several counties in northeastern Ohio, as well as several counties in western Ohio in the last 14 years. And as a field NRCS employee, she distilled complex governmental programs to agricultural producers to plan with them on how NRCS conservation programs can help with the enhancement of their agricultural operations. And then we also have Sean Marino. Sean Marino is also with the United States Department of Agricultural Natural Resource Conservation Service, and he is the resource conservationist for both Trumbull and Portage County. He was formerly our service forester, so a lot of you guys who have forest land within our area, you may have seen Sean out there for ODNR, Division of Forestry. We're now welcoming him from ODNR into NRCS. And then I will say Sean's bio before Sean starts to present. So Julie, if you want to take it away, happy to do so.
Okay, hold on, I'll share my screen. All right, can you see that presentation? Okay. All right, so I'm going to start today talking about climate smart forestry practices. And I'm going to start kind of back at the beginning with how we got here. So the United States Department of Agriculture has recently come up with practices that they've determined are climate smart. And the reasoning behind that is because agricultural use has converted a lot of land and it has depleted soil organic carbon levels over the last 150 years. And the reason behind that is because plant residues are destroyed and decomposition from all of the tillage of the carbon that was stored in the soil previously, and even increased soil erosion. So I got this picture here showing a completely land leveled field, and they're now planting it. There's not any way anything's growing right there. So for months of time during the growing season, when you're annually tilling crops, that causes issues and you lose carbon in soil. So just more background on soil organic carbon. You can increase carbon in the soil by increasing the amount of plants that are doing photosynthesis on that land. So woody perennial crops, such as anything in a forest land, or even if you were to plant any shrubs in your ag fields or anything like that, or even forage crops, they are growing longer during the year. They're taking that carbon and putting it deeper into the soil. So compared to annual crops, you're going to get 20% more soil carbon in the soil, down to 12 inches, and up to 10% more when averaged down to 39 inches in the soil. Let's see if I can get this link to work. This is a YouTube video from NASA showing how much carbon dioxide is in the air over the course of a year. Can you see that?
Yes, yes, we can, Julie. Thank you.
Okay. So just for background information, let me make it bigger. The reds and the purples, those are the most carbon dioxide in the air. And it started in January. So now it's going through February, and you can see how you're getting more and more and more carbon dioxide in the air in the northern hemisphere, especially because there's nothing growing. And then it really gets very dark once you get around planting time, because all of that tillage that is done in that short window really increases the amount of carbon. All that carbon there's carbon in all the soil that's tilled, and as you till it, it releases it into the atmosphere. So here you're getting a lot of reds and purples. And then as all of the plants start to photosynthesize, so as all the trees get their leaves out, as all the grass is growing, as all of that tilled agricultural land is starting to grow crops, by June, you start seeing it reduce. So this is how carbon dioxide cycles in the atmosphere every single year. So that's why the USDA has determined that we need to have more funding for practices that help decrease, the carbon dioxide load. So let me get out of this. All right. So why is Northeast Ohio a good place to implement this? Northeast Ohio is a temperate climate. So in tropical climates, there is a huge amount of biomass holding carbon, but it's not in the soil at all. It's all in that growing plant because it gets washed and leached out of the soil because of the increased rainfall and the increased humidity. So basically anything that dies decomposes really quickly, and so it doesn't hold any of that carbon. And in Arctic climates, you can hold carbon for a long amount of time, but nothing grows very fast. So the middle ground is a temperate climate. You're able to grow trees more quickly, and things decompose less quickly. So you are able to hold more carbon in a forest. So I spent some time reading some scientific journals where they had taken the soils of the United States and looked at how good our modeling was for how much carbon they could hold. Ohio's mostly aphosol type soils, and they have relatively high fertility, and they have been formed under forests. And so they're found in temperate climates and humid regions in the world. So it's a great place to kind of be able to build that soil carbon. So getting to the NRCS funding for this type of stuff, the Inflation Reduction Act was passed by Congress in 2023, and we began implementing, and then we're supposed to have 19.5 billion extra dollars over 5 years to implement conservation programs that yield climate change mitigation benefits. So we had some more money last year, and then this fiscal year we had, even in the state of Ohio, millions more dollars just for these Inflation Reduction Act climate smart practices. So what are the climate smart practices? This is a list from our worksheet that you can find this on one of the NRCS websites. If you would Google climate smart practices, this is our sheet. This is just the forest practices. There are climate smart practices for pasture land, for cropland, for all land uses, basically. And some of these could be used on multiple land uses, like the wildlife habitat planting. We could put that in a crop field. We could put that in an open area in a forest. So I'm going to go through and talk about each of these practices and how they would be used for our programs. So alley cropping is just the planting of rows of trees or shrubs to create alleys, which in between you would plant either agricultural crops, horticultural crops. So you could maybe grow some walnut in between your wheat fields. I have not seen this practice ever done here in Ohio, but it is an eligible Climate Smart Inflation Reduction Act practice. So if you had some situation on your land, this is a tool that we could use. Another practice is silvopasture. That is not currently a listed practice that NRCS uses in Ohio. I have heard that next year they will be using it. It will be available. However, we will only be able to use state office staff to certify and plan that practice. Because in Ohio, it has a limited use in the ways that I've seen it. A lot of people want to place animals in already fully forested areas and try to kind of control undergrowth. So there's not really good forage for them and you're not really growing anything. And a lot of times the soils are too wet to really make it anything but causing more resource concerns, causing soil erosion and compaction instead of actually being a functioning system. So I don't envision that being something we fund a lot here, but it is a climate smart practice because it would be, you know, going back to that soil organic carbon, if you were to plant some trees in your pasture to create shades or to create some barriers, even if you fenced your animals mostly out of them, that would be getting those deeper roots further into the soil to kind of store that carbon. A riparian forest buffer, they can range from 35 to 60 feet. They can be done in various programs with our agency. You can even go wider in some instances. So this would be used to lower water temperatures, to filter nutrients, and in a climate smart capturing carbon, you would want to maximize the length and width as much as possible and select plants that are fast growing. Tree and shrub establishment, this is one people use a lot. If you were really targeting carbon sequestration, you would be selecting fast growing species at first, and then maybe interplanting some longer lived species secondly. Obviously, it's also going to be great for creating wildlife habitat, energy reductions, cools the soil temperature, changes the environment quite a bit. Other practices that we have that are considered climate smart, hedgerow planting. So we usually use this for wildlife in the past, creating travel corridors that could be planted to shrubs that animals would use for food and obviously cover as well. And then the windbreak is similar, but also has the additional, you would try to plan it so that you're creating that break from any mainline winds. So you'd be planning it in a direction where if you have a large open area, we want to put it, you know, north-south if it's an east-west open area that way. And we want to make sure we have enough rows and enough different types of species to break up that wind. And we can use those on cropland acres. The hedgerow can be used in various land uses, but windbreaks are usually in a cropland type setting. This website, cometplanner.com, is, I believe, run by our agency. Let me see if I can get it to show here. You could give your project a name. You can select a state and a county. And then you can select a type of practice that you want to try out, and it'll give you, so let's say you wanted to plant trees, and you're going to go from cropland to farm to a woodlot with hardwoods. And you're going to do 2 acres of that. It shows you how much carbon dioxide you're sequestering. And you can try different practices of ours. We're supposed to use that as a tool when we're ranking applications and things like that. But if you're really interested in how we do some of those things, that is a website you can check out and try. And hedgerows and windbreaks can both vary in width depending on your goals with each practice and the site. Forest stand improvement is, we have so many different things that can be done and considered under the umbrella of a forest stand improvement. Like a different, you can do a cull tree harvest, a form, like to get better formed trees in the woodland. You can do a thinning, like a pre-commercial thinning, just to favor the trees when they're too small to really be harvestable for any sort of timber. And there are many, many more enhancements through the conservation stewardship program that involve forest stand improvement. So anytime you're manipulating the forest in this way, you're going to be letting more light in. And we have done the research that basically says the growth that those trees put on that you select for will help store carbon in the soil. And so we have considered this a practice that will increase that soil organic carbon. And then it says to increase carbon stocks with this practice, you would want to retain your woody debris on site for as long as possible to increase that carbon storage. So forest farming, I have never seen this practice here in this state at all, but it is an eligible practice that we have. When I was looking up kind of examples, it gave a lot of tropical examples. So, you know, coconuts above pineapples. So in that type of vein where you would have a tree species growing, and then you're also growing a shrub layer or a herbaceous layer, you would not have livestock for our practice. For this practice, for us, we would have to have livestock excluded from the area. But usually these type of systems have a higher above and below ground carbon stock than other agroforestry systems. So because you have those multiple levels and you're growing biomass on various spaces in, you know, from higher up to lower on the forest floor, it increases that soil organic carbon. Woody residue treatment. This practice, I've never seen it used here yet either, but based on the information on our website, it's usually used to get rid of any dead trees. So most of the videos were from out west. I think it might be more applicable out there, especially to kind of decrease wildfire hazards and things along those lines. But basically, you're taking some of the carbon that might be in a standing dead tree and taking it down to the ground so that it can decompose and get into the soil. And that, I believe, is the last practice I'm going to go over today. I think we're going to hold questions until after Sean completes his presentation. So this is my last slide. That's my contact information if you need to get a hold of me. That's it.
Awesome presentation. Thank you, Julie. And you know, to kind of go back to the layers, the herbaceous layers, you know, that kind of makes me think of like, what about like, you know, using berries and like planting like berries like blackberries, raspberries, you know, those types of shrubs. Would that be part of that system?
I think it could be, or it could be kind of an alley cropping system where you're planting some shrubs and then, or you plant shrubs and then you have rows of trees alongside.
Awesome. Awesome. So that's definitely something to think about for all you guys who are avid berry collectors. And, we just did our plant sales for all of our soil and water conservation districts, and we were selling a lot of elderberry, raspberry, and all that stuff. So if you're thinking about that, maybe that's something that you want to implement. And just real quick too, I want to let everybody know that on our the Northeast Counties Farm Bureau's YouTube channel that this would be posted on, there's also an intro to the forest carbon market. That was another Woodland Wednesdays that we did back in December. If you guys are interested in watching that one, that might be a good intro into understanding that and then utilizing some of the NRCS practices when you guys are moving forward with this and understanding the carbon sequestering and all of that stuff. Thank you so much, Julie. So we are going to move on to Sean Marino's portion of the presentation today. So just a little bit about Sean. Sean has lived the majority of his life in Summit County. He attended Hocking College in Nelsonville, Ohio, where he earned an associate's degree in forestry management, and then continued his education at the Ohio State University, where he earned his bachelor's degree in forestry, fisheries, and wildlife management. Sean worked 2 internships with the Division of Forestry working on state lands. And after college, he worked for a private environmental consulting company for 1 year. And he was hired full-time for working with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources Division of Forestry as the service forester for Portage, Trumbull, Summit, and Mahoning counties. So you may have seen him. At this time of this presentation, he has recently moved from the Division of Forestry to the Natural Resource Conservation Service to work as a resource conservationist, assisting in a wide range of projects, but with a special focus on forestry-related projects in Trumbull and Portage County. So welcome, Sean, and take it away.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes, you're good to go,
Yes.
Sean.
Okay, good. All right. Yeah. Hi, everybody. Like Sean said earlier, my name is Sean Marino with NRCS, working out of the Ravenna office. And I'm here to talk to you guys about some climate smart forestry. Let me share my screen. All right. And can everybody see that?
You are good to go, my friend.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Yeah. Here's the start of the presentation. Like I said, so it's going to be over climate smart forestry. Get this thing actually move. There we go. Sorry. So a quick overview of what we're going to talk about, the 2 big topics. First half, we're going to talk about what the forest place is and the carbon cycle. Then after that, we're going to talk about how you can fit some of these carbon smart practices in your forest. And I wanted to add this map on here because it does show why this is important for Northeast Ohio. As you can see up here, if you can see my mouse up here in the Northeast, while we're not the most forested portion of the state, we are still heavily forested, anywhere from 43,000 acres to 287,000 acres, depending on the county, is forested. So we can really make a big impact by implementing some of these practices. Let's see. Some key terms and words. I know Julie kind of went over some of these, but just so everything's defined so everyone knows what I'm talking about. Carbon sequestering or carbon sequestration. That's just the process of capturing and storing atmospheric carbon. Carbon storage, total amount of carbon contained in a forest or the parts of the forest. Carbon sink, that's anything that absorbs more carbon from the atmosphere than it releases. And a carbon source is anything that releases more carbon in the atmosphere than it absorbs. So just generally speaking today, for at least during this presentation, carbon sinks are a good thing. Carbon sources are what we're trying to avoid. So carbon in a forest, this is a very watered down, very simplified version of what's actually going on. But basically what happens is plants such as trees, they're going to take in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and they're going to convert it. They're going to take the carbon, create carbon or carbohydrates, and they're going to release oxygen as a byproduct. This is the process known as photosynthesis. And how these plants use these carbohydrates is basically just use it for everything in their day-to-day process. They'll use it for a building block to produce mass, such as growing stems, branched leaves, or producing seeds, or chemicals for defenses. Why this is so important for when we're talking about forests and compared to like pollinator plots or ag fields or things like that, is that if you can see on this photo down here, half of the dry weight of wood is made from carbon that's taken in from the atmosphere. When we're talking about other herbaceous plants, we're only looking around 42%. So if we convert or keep properties to forested areas or heavily wooded areas, it's going to take in just that much more carbon. So here's a nice diagram that kind of explains what the natural, or what we're going to call the natural carbon cycle, is going to look like. This is basically how it would work if we take humans out of the equation. And what it shows is the carbon cycle in a forest and how much it takes and how much it lets out is going to go through boom busts. When the forest is growing, it's healthy. The carbon uptake or carbon sequestering and carbon storage is going to be very high. But then eventually does release that carbon back into the atmosphere, whether it's slowly through the process of decomposition or through a quick event like fire. That's when the forest can really be a carbon source. But if everything goes well, the forest should just replace itself. It'll regenerate, new stems will grow in, and that carbon sequestering and carbon storage will go back up, become a carbon sink again. This one is what we're going to refer to today as the modern carbon cycle. This is with the timber industry in mind. The two main circles I want you to see here are this inner circle and the most outer circle. Inner circle, that is that natural carbon cycle we're talking about. Carbon from the atmosphere goes in trees. They use it to grow and produce mass. Eventually they die off, or whether it's fire or just naturally decompose, release that carbon back in the atmosphere. But if we look at this outer layer or outer circle, again, carbon comes from the atmosphere, goes in trees, but down here towards the bottom is where we do a timber harvest and harvest those stems. And this is through hopefully a responsible harvest. And that woody material goes into products, whether it's furniture, houses, whatever. And as long as those products are still around, as long as they're not rotting away or burned, that carbon is still trapped inside those products. Eventually it will be released again when it's burned or cut, but that carbon is still in those products, those wood products. So don't think that if you want to be climate smart forestry, that means no harvesting, because when we harvest and use it well, this carbon is still stored, and we've made room for new trees to come in, take in more carbon. The idea is not, don't be anti-timber harvesting, just be pro-responsible timber harvesting. So I'm going to make that clear. So now that we talked about how carbon's used in the forest, and that we can use it for sequestering in or taking in carbon, what's the best version of the forest that we're going to be looking for? A lot of people are going to have this idea that the best way to sequester and store carbon in your forest is just to let it grow and never cut it, never touch it, just let it do what it is. That's not quite accurate. As you can see from this diagram, yes, as a forest matures, it is going to be storing and taking in more carbon, but there is a point where the sequestration rate really starts to slow down, and that's when it gets to be a mature or even over mature forest. And this isn't because an older tree doesn't take in as much carbon as one of these younger trees, these medium-sized trees. Individual trees, a bigger tree will sequester more carbon than a smaller tree, but we're not talking about trees here, or individual trees, we're talking about forests. And when we get a forest that's full of mature or over mature trees, there's less stems we can fit on that property per acre. So there's less room and allow them to grow well. So we fit less stems, so that leads to the lower sequestration rate. So really we're aiming for this, to try to keep the forest in this middle-aged area. Again, let them grow. The trees will grow large, grow mature. Hopefully then we can get a good harvest in, utilize those woods, store that carbon in good wood products, keep those middle-aged younger trees in, let them grow and replace, and just keep that cycle going. And we will talk about, doing things like patch clear cutting, things like that, where you're going to move towards these initial young age forests yes, there's low storage and low sequestration rate, but the only way we get to get mature forest to have young forest. So it's just a step we have to take sometimes. But age and size class and stocking levels, that's not the only reason why, or things that affect the storage rates. We have all kinds of other reasons. Species composition is going to be a big one. Hardwoods versus softwoods, or deciduous versus conifers, long-lived or short-lived species. If you look at this graph on the far left, kind of shows how the different forest types store carbon over time. This green line right here is going to be pines. Mostly it's going to be white, red, and jack pines. You can see how it quickly drops off compared to our other species, our species comps. This yellow dotted line or orange dotted line right here is going to be our softer deciduous trees. It's going to be a maple, beech, birch forest. You see it holds up, and then it does drop off, especially when we compare it to something like our, the picturesque hardwood forest type, which is the oak hickory. It starts off slow, but then really catches up and holds on the strongest. So if we're trying to really prioritize carbon sequestering, that's the species type we're going to be looking for. Other things are going to be location and climate, like Julia talked about. There's different climates are going to have different sequestration rates or storage rates. Tropics, high sequestration; low storage, cold, low sequestration, long storage. Temperate areas like Ohio, it's going to be that nice middle ground, that Goldilocks zone. So these are really important in our area. Other impacts might be history of disturbances. Has the area been harvested? Has it been harvested poorly? Has it gone through some diseases? Things like that. Pests, just the overall health of the forest. All these are going to impact how much carbon the stand can take in, and how much it's going to hold for the long term. So now transitioning over to the forest management portion of it. Does managing for forest or carbon sequestration mean you can't manage for other goals? And I believe that's a really easy question. It's no. Carbon sequestering is just like any other goal. We can manage for multiple of those at one time. In most cases, whether you're trying to or not, you're meeting multiple different goals at one time. And in my opinion, carbon sequestration is probably one of the easiest ones to fit with all your other goals. Just like any other goal, though, you have to realize where it lies in your list of priorities. That way you know how much to weigh it when you're making decisions in your forest. People own woods for all kinds of reasons in Ohio. You have any of these goals, might be they're trying to have a good impact on the carbon or climate change and the carbon sequestering of the area, like we're talking about today. Maybe you bought your woods to make some money off it, whether that's through timber production or a non-timber forest product. Maybe you have a sugar bush, maybe you have honeybees, maybe you're collecting mushrooms, all kinds of reasons. Wildlife habitat, maybe you're a hunter, maybe you're a bird watcher, maybe you just care about wildlife. You might have your woods just to get away somewhere quiet, or because you want to ride four-wheelers or any other recreational sport, skiing, anything like that. Or what most likely is happening is you probably have that woods for multiple of these reasons. Most people just use their woods for all kinds of things. And a lot of times those goals change over time. So how are we going to reach those goals? A lot of times going to be going over through our practices and management strategies. Some of these are going to overlap with Julie, so I'll try to not stay too long on those. But the first two I'm going to go over, I think, are A, a good starting point, and B, the minimum you should be doing in your forest. That first step is going to be creating a forest management plan. This is where I admit to you all that forestry is not the most creative field. Pretty much everything is just named what it is. So a forest management plan is just a plan to manage your forest. If you really wanted to work, you should get it created by a professional forester. And in a lot of the programs in the area, it's going to require it to be made from a forester on a specific list that's earned certain certifications. It's usually the base requirement to get in those programs, whether that's a tax program, tree farm certification, some NRCS programs, they're going to require you to have a forest management plan. And if you're getting that through NRCS, the code for it is 106, sometimes referred to as CPA 106. But it's basically a blueprint of forest. This image over here kind of breaks down how that process works. At the very top, landowner meets with the forester, talks about what they want, and this is where they really go over, identify your objectives, your priorities, your goals, whatever you want to refer to it as. Go over what that is. then the landowner's going to come down or actually the forester's actually going to walk your property, figure out what you have. So he told them what you want. They're going to figure out what you have, and that means both good and bad. And good and bad is not a hard rule. It's going to be defined off what your goals are. A sugarbush management is going to have different goals than a wildlife habitat or deer hunter. So good and bad is going to be flexible. Then they're going to give you advice, tell you what to do, and that's going to be out in the form of your written management plan. Hopefully then you follow that plan to the best of your abilities, because they didn't just write that plan for fun. They gave it to you to help you lead where you need to go. But that whole time, keep continuing engagement with your forester, because eventually you're going to have to get that plan re-upped, or your goals might change, or something might change in the landscape. So it's a big cycle. This is a great first step, just because it tells you where to focus your efforts, where to focus your time, your money, all that. So that way you're just not blindly cutting through your woods. And then this is the next step that I think is the bare minimum you should do on the ground management, which is brush management or invasive plant control. It's just control non-native invasives, whether it's woody invasives or herbaceous plants. These are just a handful of them. But up here we have Japanese knotweed, garlic mustard, buckthorn, phragmites, autumn olive, and tree of heaven or lanthus. And why I think this is the bare minimum is because this is going to impact everything else you do in the forest. If you do a timber stand improvement cut, or you do an actual timber sale, this is what's going to grow in if you don't have them under control. Do a tree planting, this is going to outcompete them. Do a pollinator plot, this is going to outcompete. It just impacts everything. So focus on this. Sometimes I tell people this is eating your vegetables, you got to get it done. Or I might refer to it as oil change, just because once you get it done once, it's not like, oh, it's gone, done forever. It's something you got to do year after year. And here's just a quick example of some of the different strategies you might use. Again, not create a field. Up here we have cut stem, treat the stump. Top right, foliar spraying, spray the leaves. Right here in the middle, that's what officially is called stem injection. Most people are going to refer to it as hack and squirt, because you hack the stem, squirt chemical inside that hack you just made, and then basal treatment, we spray the bottom foot. What strategy you use is going to depend on the species you're treating, the amount you're treating, what gear you have, how big is the stem. And you don't have to do this yourself. There are professionals out there that you can hire to do this work. But if you are going to do it yourself, I suggest reaching out to a professional for advice, or at the very least, looking up some fact sheets. I suggest going to Penn State's. They have fact sheets that are very helpful, tell you what chemical to use, how to use it, all that. So that's usually what I end up looking up when I have a question. Next, forest improvement. Julie touched on this. This is forest thinning. Basic idea is that we're trying to lower competition, whether that's cold tree removal, where we take out the bad stems, crop tree, where we try to promote the good stems. That's what this diagram up here at the top left is showing. It's where you cut the stems around your target tree or crop tree and give it room to grow, referred to as releasing. Generally, you're looking for 4 to 3 sides to actually have any real impact. Or another management strategy is down here in the bottom left, that's patch clear cutting. That's where you're taking an area, an acre to a handful of acres, and cutting everything down. Generally, this is either to try to reset an area that has basically junk in it, because it was either high graded or disease or fire or something came through, or you're trying to make some type of habitat. A lot of hunters will use this for woodcock or turkey or things like that. Then we have tree shrub and planting. This can be bare root seedlings, container burlap, root balls, or direct seeding. Overwhelming majority of the time in Ohio or in this area, it's going to be bare root seedlings. And you can use these tree tubes. You don't have to. That's going to kind of be case by case as well. There are advantages to supplemental planting over natural regeneration. Generally, you're going to have more control over the species comp, where those trees are, where they're being placed. Potentially, it might be quicker to get to that forest that you want. And it's going to be more organized again. You're choosing where all those seedlings are going. Disadvantages, it's much higher cost. You have to pay for all those seedlings. It's going to be much more work. You have to plant all those seedlings that you just bought, or you have to pay somebody to plant them. So that just raises your level of costs. And at the very least, you're going to find somebody and hire somebody to plant them. And it's risky work. Just because you plant them doesn't mean they're going to live. It's not unheard of for people to plant entire fields full of seedlings, and then little to none of them make it. Everything's working against a seedling. Weather, deer, how they were planted, genetics. There's all these things that can go wrong. So be ready. It's always a kind of a gamble whenever you're doing tree planting. And the last topic is wildlife habitat creation or enhancement. This is the widest variety. You can see all these different NRCS codes that might fall under this. This is just manipulating or altering the current conditions or creating new structures to fit target species. And we're going to do different practices for different species. Game species have different needs than songbirds, different needs than pollinators, and even in those categories, like for instance, game species, woodcock has different needs than a white-tailed deer. So it's going to be very site-specific. This is where those in the field professionals really come in handy. But these practices include anything from, creating nesting structures or boxes to edge feathering to putting pollinator plots to creating wetlands. There's tons of different practices under this category. In this slide, I wanted to kind of cover or show you how we can do multiple of these goals at one time. So here's 4 different examples of goals. We might have timber production, sugarbush management, wildlife habitat management, and carbon sequestering. And all the blue ones are the, over the big strategies that kind of overlap or that do overlap. All 4 I'm going to create a management plan for. We want to know where to spend our time, when to spend our money. All of these we're going to control and monitor for non-native invasives because again, they impact everything else we do. All of these we can release target species, release those good trees. This is where the variance is going to start to come in because what our target species is going to depend on what our goal is. Sugarbush, it's always going to be maples. We want to try to promote, maples because that's where we get maple syrup from. But for something like timber production, it could be maples if that's the best stem we have, but normally it's going to be our higher value stems like oaks, walnuts, hickories. Wildlife habitat could be those oaks, walnuts, hickories, anything that's mass producing, but also soft mass, cherries, crab apples, pawpaws. Carbon sequestration, basically anything long-lived hardwoods, again, oaks, hickories, maples, things like that. All these practices though might call our unwanted stems. Again, what's wanted and unwanted is going to depend on the goal. Normally it's going to be poor form and then a species that's not congruent to our goal. All these we might do supplemental plantings if we have an area where there's no forest there. Again, just what we plant depend on the goal. And all these practices we can do a timber harvest if it is time for it. If it's just a reasonable time to do a responsible timber harvest. And again, I just kind of put this slide up here to show you that we can work towards multiple goals at one time. But sometimes we do have to prioritize ones over the other. So something like wildlife habitat and sugarbush, those tend to work against each other more than others. Maples don't have that much wildlife value to them. And oaks and hickories are taking up room for maples. But just because you're growing a sugarbush doesn't mean cut everything that's not an oak or that isn't a maple. That just leads you to a monoculture, which leads you open to disease. And if you have wildlife, you're trying to grow for wildlife doesn't mean cut every single maple because it still is adding structure. And for instance, if you have your goal is timber and you have a stand that's all maples and beeches, don't just go cutting maples because it's not an oak or a walnut. That's now your best species that you have. So just promote the few oaks and hickories you have, but still really look after the maples because that's now your money tree. Most time it's forest management is working with what you have. And I wish there was, a rule I could just give you guys that says, if you're doing this, just do that. A lot of times though, it's going to be person to person, landowner to landowner, site to site. So really that's where you got to utilize those professionals Sean was talking about earlier. Come out, contact them, try to get us out there. That's the best way to do this. Finally, I want to get over some big points, just kind of big takeaways that I hope that you all take from this. Number one, it's contact and utilize those professionals. There's a lot out there, whether you know it or not. In the public sphere, you have things, people like service foresters and wildlife biologists with the state. Federal side, you have NRCS employees like me and Julie. County-wise, you have soil and water conservation districts. Then on the private side, you have consultant foresters and timber stand improvement vendors. All these all of us are here to help. Generally, if you don't know where to start, I highly suggest going with the people in the public sphere. We're cheaper. You've already paid for us through your taxes. And at the worst, if we can't help you, we're going to point you in the right direction of who to go to. And then hopefully from there, when you start getting into, bigger projects, that's when the private sector starts coming. Number two is make a plan, whether it's formal or informal. I'm pushing towards the formal side, but it just gives you an idea of where to spend your time and money and efforts. Be ready for a slow process. Those plans, they last 10 years. So we're talking in decades, but you also have to be ready for quick reaction because sometimes things run through fast. If it's a fire or disease like oak wilt, that can ruin a stand very quickly. So you have to be quick to be reactive, but prepared for the slow process. Follow that plan to the best of your ability, but it's not locked in stone, whether you're reacting to changes on the landscape or reacting to changes in your goals or just in your life. It's a plan, but it's not a law. And look for help again. Contact those professionals when it's time comes for it. You can see one's bigger than the other, or than all the other four, and that's number 3, which is don't sell timber on your own. I'm not saying this all to scare you away from selling timber, but Northeast Ohio is known for bad timber sales and timber harvests. There's a lot of bad actors in the timbering field, whether they're doing it on purpose or not. But the bottom line is there's a lot of bad sales. This is where those consultant foresters really come in handy. But this is also where you have to be careful, because just because somebody says they're a forester does not mean they're a forester. There's no licensing in Ohio that's required to be a forester. And then even if someone does have a background in forestry, there's different, consultant forester is different than procurement forester, which is different than a timber buyer, which is different than a master logger. These are all different players in this field. At the end of the day, a consultant forester is somebody that you hire that works in the private industry that is looking out for the best, looking out best for you in your pockets and your forest. Those other players, they might not be looking to destroy your woods. At the end of the day, they're looking for the best financial profits for their company. Again, if you don't know who's a good consultant forester to hire, or who's trustworthy or anything, go to one of these public figures or people in the public industry or field. That's the word. While they might not be able to tell you, hire X, they can give you a list of people who have extra certification, kind of help prove they know what they're doing. And the last point is just enjoy yourself. I'm sure you didn't buy woods to make it a chore, although sometimes it does feel like it, especially middle of summer when you're spraying invasives. Might be cussing me out. But hopefully when that's done, you can really enjoy it. Use it for whatever you bought it for, whatever those goals were. And try to, if you can trick yourself into making work feel like fun, it helps. Here's some works cited. This is some pages I used to get some information in this presentation. Here's some just for photos. I don't know how much you guys care about that. And then here's my contact information. If you ever need to get a hold of me, whether it's for an NRCS project or a question or forestry just related question, you can always contact me. Email, office number, cell phone, and address. Yeah, I think that's everything for the presentation, unless anyone has any questions.
I have a question. I come from Geauga County. We have a lot of people who burn firewood to, heat their houses here. And in defense of that, they mentioned that, if the wood, the trees fall to the ground and they rot in the ground, they are going to give up their carbon anyways, as you mentioned in your presentation. So is it inevitable that the carbon goes back into the carbon cycle?
Yeah, I guess it's so with a lot of this stuff, it's kind of talking about what's the scope we're looking at. Like I was saying, if you turn wood into a wood product, there's American chestnut that's been around for hundreds of years, boards that have been around for hundreds of years, the carbon's still stuck in there. If we're talking about a tree that's falling down, yeah, eventually it's gonna go back into the cycle. It's gonna rot away, it's gonna burn, something's gonna happen. So it will get released eventually. Rotting timber in Ohio is probably going to release slower than burning firewood. This is where it kind of gets complicated, because then you also have to judge how much is carbon is burning firewood compared to burning. I'm sure they don't have a coal burner, but if they have a coal burner, there's that comparison too, or burning. So it can get a little bit complicated. So if you're trying to weigh each and every motion or step, but yes, it will eventually go back into the cycle.
Thank you.
It's also important to note too that even though a log or a snag, these things that they'll eventually emit their carbon, there's other benefits to them too, right? Like wildlife habitat, food source for various creatures. So it is a part of that cycle for a reason. So definitely keep that in mind. as you're moving forward with your management plan. And you know, Sean and Julie definitely touched base about this, and all resource professionals are gonna, you know, we're gonna sound like a broken record. I know I do. It's all about your goals, guys. You know, first thing is getting those goals planned and really focusing on those goals and working with those resource professionals to make those goals happen. You know, like a clear cut can be very beneficial if that's the goal for certain types of wildlife, right? It's also, you know, an improvement cut, taking out certain things but leaving everything else because you want to improve that specific species and promote that growth, right? So always keep that in mind. We're very much, Ohio is a special place where we will always have to manage our land, right? We cannot let it just go back to what it was, because like Sean you know, focused on in that one slide, all those invasives. I mean, NRCS, they have a plethora of knowledge on focusing on invasives for you guys and going out and identifying them with you, using the practices that they have to help eliminate those through the incentivized programs. So definitely keep that in mind. If there's any other questions, you guys can feel free to put in the chat. You know, we can chime in there. You guys can put a, you know, a hand raise, and I'm happy to announce you guys if you guys want to talk to Julie and Sean. Something that kind of comes to mind for me, Julie, when we were talking about like the ag fields and stuff, I actually am coming across quite a few landowners. I was actually out 2 weeks ago on a farm in northern Trumbull County, and the issue that these farmers were having was a part of their field is the flow of water is just naturally flowing there. It used to just sit there for a little bit. They lost a couple bushels of corn, but not too much. But now it's starting to grow and grow and grow. And one of the methods that I, you know, proposed was maybe that's, you know, a conversion of what that use of that land is. And what do you feel about, like, you know, we are seeing in Trumbull County specifically a lot of ag land, you know, for crops kind of converting over into forest land. And in that aspect, right, how beneficial you feel like, you know, replacing that from corn into, you know, some type of stand, timber stand.
Anything where you're doing less disturbance to the soil is going to build that organic matter in the soil and store that carbon. So, you know, transitioning from a row crop to a tree planting that's a huge benefit, you know, in the long term.
Awesome. Yeah. So, you know, just remember that, guys, that, you know, sometimes you can manipulate your goals to meet all your needs, right? And that's where reaching out to professionals like NRCS or Soil and Water, you know, we can help try to like navigate you guys into what other alternatives there are that could benefit you, not only, you know, just your wildlife or your recreational goals, but also your financial goals, right? You know, I mean, in a very wet area, you can start, you know, focusing on your swamp white oaks and things like that, which, you know, can form a nice profit, but as well as, you know, meet the goals of your wildlife habitats that you guys want to grow and incorporate into your lands. So that's definitely something that I think that we all should be thinking about here in northeastern Ohio. I think we can all agree that we're getting a lot more precipitation in the area. We're seeing a lot of areas that used to, you know, I'm getting a lot of landowners that are like, it's never flooded my property, but now it is. And that's where, you know, thinking about being stewards of the land, you guys are all here for that reason. That can really benefit you for sure. So if there's any other questions, we're happy to stick around for a little bit. Other than that, thank you guys for presenting. I really appreciate you guys coming on board. Looks like we have from Linda, when dealing with invasive shrubs in woodlands, such as multiflora rose, yeah, that's a big one, is forest mulching as effective as spraying herbicide? What are some things to consider in making that choice?
In my opinion, really, if you're going to do herbicide or invasive species control, it's kind of have to use herbicides. It's really the only effective route. Mulching and cutting kind of just resets the stem. The problem is that root layer or that root system. As long as that's alive, that plant's gonna keep moving back. I have had talked to some people, and they say if you keep mulching multiflora rows and you know, you let the canopy grow over, eventually kind of keeps it under control. But as soon as you get another disturbance, it's gonna go right back to it. So a lot of time with our invasive species control, it's kind of choosing your evil. Do you want to spray herbicides or do you want to control your invasives? if you're worried about invasive, herbicide use, I don't blame it at all. It's a chemical. You got to use it. You got to be safe. Generally, then I'm either going to suggest that you hire a vendor out just because they work with this material every day. They have the equipment, they know how to use it, they have the PPE, and it keeps you more distant from it. And then you can use strategies such as like cut stump, where you mulch the plant, and then you come back and spray the root system. That kind of lowers the amount of off target spray you have. So that way you're not just spraying, foliar leaves, however you say it. Kind of leads to a little more offshoot spray. So yeah, it's I would say you're probably gonna have to use herbicides. If you can pull it up the root system, it's a small enough plant, you can pull it out the whole root system, that can kill it too. But a lot of time, once we get those large plants, that root system's so established, you're gonna do so much damage to the soil trying to rip up the roots. It's probably not worth it. So yeah, I would. Unfortunately, it's looking like herbicides, and other people say things about like goats and using cattle, but again, that root system's going to survive. So, unfortunately, the herbicide's probably the best option.
Right. Yeah. And let me just say that multiflora rose is a very opportunistic invasive that all of us resource professionals, I try to identify it with youth so that they can identify it, right? And they see it, they can handle it. Like Curtis kind of said too, you can always cut it too. And this goes back to one of Sean's points. You can cut it and you can spray it on the stump. That's gonna kill it. And I know with some invasives like Phragmites, there are methods of trying to plant over that seed bank. That is a method that some our NRCS professionals can help focus and identify that with you guys, as far as trying to suppress the seed bank. And, eventually things are growing over top of it. They're going to consistently push that down. But, there's always a chance that it could come back. So, keep that in mind. That's why NRCS is here with those practices. And yeah, sometimes, it's inevitable that we have to like contract that work out to someone to bring those professionals on to take care of those invasives for you. And unfortunately, I'd have to say we're going to have to constantly deal with invasives. Even like the Western Land Conservancy, absolutely phenomenal, goes out and tries to manage lands as perfect as they can. They still have to deal with invasives on a year-to-year basis, regardless of if they pretty much eradicated it that year, right? They're going to know the next year, the next 3 years, we're going to have to come back and we're going to have to do this again. But it is good to know, and it's good to be a part of. And just another fact too, like Sean was showing with those identifications, that's another thing that we all do as resource professionals. We are happy to come out, look at your invasives, identify those with you, and talk about what type of management practices you can utilize to limit, to a degree of eliminating those invasives, right? And get that word out, spread that word for sure to all of your neighbors and other landowners that are also stewards of the land. I'm sure that they found out about multiflora rose, they'd want to handle it too. And let's be real, who wants to run through a whole bunch of thorny bushes that don't belong in Ohio? I know I don't. So
if it's in the woods, I find it. I always come home with it in my leg. I'll find it eventually.
Yes. Yeah. I actually was showing the kids there up in Ashtabula today. There was no I didn't see any other invasives. No buckthorn, no autumn olive, but definitely the multiflora. It was there. So, but yeah, Linda, that is great to bring up. I think that multiflora is one of the plants that'll like pretty much every landowner is dealing with. If there's any other questions, feel free to raise your hands, put it in. Looks like Bruce responded, says they make squeeze bottles so you can do cut stump treatment without spraying. Yes, that's true. They work very well. They have a value in the top, so you can lay them down and they won't leak. Oh, okay. Oh, they have a valve on the top. Gotcha. So yeah, there's always some great tools. reaching out to, some consulting foresters. If you get a consulting forester to come do a management plan, ask them about those tools, right? NRCS, if you guys get into EQIP, right, that's the incentivized program. Ask them about that when you guys submit your management plan through EQIP, like say, what type of tool should I use if I want to do this myself, right? So that way they can lay that down for you and help, guide you. And also, they're going to make sure throughout that process that you guys are getting what you need done, finished, and or pushing you in the right direction if that's what you need. So don't forget that. Natalie just posted a link. It looks like that's cuts for buckthorn. She's a big fan of the buckthorn blaster. Okay, yeah. Okay, Bruce says that's what he uses. So great.
Buckthorn's an annoying one. That's one that
Yeah.
you especially have to keep up on. That idea of like, just because it's gone, you trade it doesn't mean it's gone. If you let that go a year, maybe or two, it's right back to where it was. So that's where that constant monitoring. I'm always monitoring your forest, whether it's for disease, invasives, any kind of threat, because once those get out of hand, they're really out of hand.
Yes.
Yeah, Sean and I went out to a property in Trumbull County, and the guy had actually done the work a couple years prior and then had not followed up, and his plants were back to 6 foot tall, huge bushes again. So I'm gonna make sure you're following up every year.
That's right. Yes. And, and look, Curtis responded in the chat, said, I used a quart hand spray bottle for cut stump. There are so many methods that work. The best thing is that if you don't know, there's always a place to start. And, like Sean said, it can seem like work managing your forests. It can be fun. You can make it fun. It can be a little, a little annoying to say the least. However, just remind yourselves, slow and steady wins the race in the aspect of, woodland management. These things take a long time to grow. It's going to take a long time to manage. And that's the fun in it, right? Is that you get to see that growth over time. I'm growing a whole bunch of pawpaws. If you guys don't know what the pawpaw, Sean mentioned this, great wildlife fruit. It's one of the largest soft mass fruits that we have here. We're growing them up here in Ohio now. So that's another goal. If you're planning on trying to do plantings for wildlife or planting for yourself, there's some benefits in focusing on those types of plants. And making it fun, like growing things that you and your family can go out and forage. That's a lot of fun. And there's a little bit of management in that, right? And teaching your kids how to manage it. So, maybe you could pass off the task to them. That's great. So, there's always an opportunity for all of us to make sure we can get some things done for our forests. Let's see here. So yeah, Natalie said that buckthorn blaster, it works for all cut stump applications, as long as it's on the small side. Okay, cool, good to know. Yeah, that's definitely important. So do we have any other questions, comments? Give you guys a few minutes. Definitely say that this was very informative, and you guys have Julie and Sean's information. I'm going to tell you that we usually send out a resource guide of all the resource professionals that you guys can reach out with. I implore you, use that list. Reach out to us. That's what we're here for. That's what we get paid to do, is work on your guys' behalf to make sure that your goals are being implemented the way that you want them implemented. And reach out to us, reach out to NRCS and their programs. They're happy to get you guys started on that, get you into the rigmarole of the application process and all of that stuff. I know Julie, and I'm going to say Sean, from his experience with ODNR, they're fantastic people. I will always upsell them to any landowner. So feel free to reach out to them. They'll also make sure that they get you to the right person if you're not within those counties. If you're not in Ashtabula County and you reach out to Julie, she's going to get you to the right person in your county, in your district, to make sure that you're in good hands. So we definitely appreciate that for sure. So I'm not seeing any other questions. Just a quick FYI, we will be sending out a survey about the program tonight and the Woodland Wednesday program overall. I definitely would like you guys to fill that out if you have the chance. So Manny's going to get that out to you guys. And we're happy to hear your feedback and improve as wherever we can. So other than that, if we are all good to go, you know, you guys are welcome to head on out. Again, I appreciate you. Gail says, great information, and thank you, Julie, Sean, and Sean. Yes, so fun fact, Sean is the NRCS employee now, and I am Sean, the soil and water employee, and we both have the Irish Sean names. So feel free to call me and say you need to speak to Sean Marino, and I'm gonna say, okay, no worries. I'll get you to Sean Marino. So happy to do so. Thank you, guys. You guys enjoy your nights, and thank you for attending. Linda says thank you. Bruce says yes and thanks. Awesome. Thank you, guys.